Hello, hello. Welcome, folks. Yes,
Hello.
Bob. That is a new. There was a new URL, so sorry for that. It's been quite a bit of back and forth between our platforms trying to figure out technology. You would imagine 1.5 years into the pandemic, we would have figured all these things out. But also much props to our speaker for also helping, adjust to these last minute platform changes, and really excited for the talk ahead today. So we have quite a few folks joining in. Where are folks joining in from? I see Bob's here from Vancouver. Where all other places are folks joining in from today? And also, do let us know if you did attend Sam's last talk. That was quite an exciting talk. We did not record it. This talk, though, will be recorded. So I know we are running about 15 minutes late. So if you do have to leave early, do not worry. We will be pulling back the stream and posting it on our website so that you can view it later. Adam's joining from Toronto. Bo joining from Wisconsin. Wow, Rio de Janeiro. That's amazing. So folks joining in from all across Colorado, Thomas from Poland. Amazing. Michigan, Durham, Boston. Wow. Quite a few different geographies being covered today. And even India. Wow. Thank you for joining us, Pooja. It must be like almost close to midnight there. But the session will definitely be worth it. So won't take up too much of time. For the folks that might be joining in the stream right now, so we will be recording the talk. So even if we are going a little later than the intended 2 p.m. EST when it was supposed to end, do not worry. The video will be shared on our DesignX community, as well as will be posted on the website later. Massive shout out to our friends at Fable for helping not only make this event possible with Samuel, but also helping support the community. They are our quarterly partner. Do check it out. Check out makeitfable.com. They are an incredible platform that help designers, product folks, and platforms and companies become more accessible and get access to doing more accessibility testing with their platforms, a challenge that's often faced by designers, when they don't have those resources at hand. Niku, where can we find the last talk? So sorry, the last talk was not recorded. It was more of a live AMA session. So we'll be hosting more of those with Sam in the future too. If there are specific case studies that you're interested in or specific topics around accessibility, please do let us know, and we'll see if Sam has time to once again join us and share those learnings and insights. Okay, so a lot of me talking. Now let's go ahead and welcome our speaker. So really excited to once again host Samuel. He's the accessibility evangelist at Fable. And big shout out to Sam for educating our community over the last 6-7 weeks. Do join the topic accessibility channel, where also more discussions and resources around this topic can be found. So welcoming on stage, Samuel.
Hey, good afternoon to you, and greetings to everyone from around the world. Sounds like we've got people where it's anywhere from the afternoon to midnight.
Yeah.
Great to be here this afternoon and to get to talk to you all once again. I know some of you were at the previous session I gave that was more of a kind of live demo and AMA type of session. If there is interest, happy to do more of those because that one was not recorded, but this one will be. I know we're starting a little bit late, so unless there's anything you wanted to add, Preet, why don't I just get right into it?
Absolutely. Just one small thing is this platform So we were using Zoom last time. It's much more accessible. This platform does not have live transcriptions. So what I will do, Samuel, is I'll request everyone to keep posting the questions in the chat, and I can pull them up towards the end of the talk. And if we have 5 minutes for Q&A, we can bring them up. Does that work?
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds great for me. And perhaps the recordings, we can send them off somewhere and make sure that transcripts are available during the talk recording for those of you who would like them.
Sounds great.
All right. That said, what I'm going to be talking about today is helping you think about accessible design as an opportunity to innovate, because the way that we think about things has a huge impact on the way that we do things, on the way that we prioritize things, on the way that we implement things. And so my goal in this talk today is to shift the way that you might think about some key topics, about some topics in design, about some topics around accessibility, and about some topics around disability as well. That said, before we begin, for those of you who do not know me, I'm Sam Prue. I am the accessibility evangelist here at Fable. So I spend a lot of time getting the opportunity to talk to wonderful folks like yourselves about accessibility and about why accessibility is so important, and why, when you're doing accessibility work, it's so important to involve the voices and the experiences of people with disabilities in that work. When I'm not talking about accessibility, I am, of course, a lifetime screen reader user myself. Cannot remember the time growing up that there wasn't some kind of accessible talking computer around me. Spend a lot of time moderating Reddit, a lot of time reading ebooks, and a lot of time playing a great number of accessible online games. But that's enough about me. Let's move into things. So the first thing when we think about accessibility, the first thing I want to change is this idea that accessibility is just for like a small group of people. We tend to think of people with disabilities as like these edge cases, as these unique people who need this special thing. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Accessibility features are used by everyone all the time because accessibility features make experiences better. If we take a minute to pull back from the web and from websites and think about the physical world, that becomes pretty obvious. When was the last time you used an automatic door because your hands were full, or an elevator because you didn't want to take the stairs, or curb cuts and ramps because you were pushing a baby carriage or a stroller, or you had a wheeled suitcase, or a cart, or any number of things like that? I mean, something that a lot of us probably use every day was invented as a physical accessibility feature, the electric toothbrush, because it made it easier for people with disabilities who may not have had the physical dexterity to brush their teeth, made it easier for them to do it. And we suddenly found out, hey, if it makes it easier for these folks to brush their teeth, it makes electric toothbrushes make it easier for all of us. Why don't we all use those? And the same thing applies in the digital world. Everybody uses things that started off as accessibility features because they make our experiences better. We can think about dark mode. We can think about pinch to magnify the screen. We can think about the times that we use captions because we're in a loud environment, or we need to have our audio on mute, or we don't want to disturb people or whatever. We can think about the times that we use dictation on our phone because we're just not in a place where we can type on our small phone keyboard right now. Perhaps we're driving. We can think about our voice assistants that we use for similar reasons. GPS, in order to get around, really started off as something that was used by blind folks who couldn't use maps. We think about features like Do Not Disturb, which is not only useful to us when we need to concentrate and we need to stop the flow of notifications, but it's useful to those with cognitive challenges. And so really, accessibility features are are for everyone, and everyone will use them. And so when we think about these accessibility features, the other next thing that we can change and that we can really think more clearly about is what disability actually is. I'm going to cover this very briefly because it's not directly related to design, but I think it's important. There are two ways that we as society often think about disability. And those are divided kind of into the medical model and the social model. The medical model tells us that people with disabilities are broken. People with disabilities have to be fixed. And it's doctors, experts, and authorities who know what's best for people with disabilities and how to fix them. And it tells us that disability is abnormal. However, I'm sure all of you have heard the stat at least once in your life that 1 in 5 people currently live with a disability. And so how can we say that like 1 in 5 people are not normal, that 1 in 5 people are broken? And so that leads us into the social model that says that people are disabled because of flaws in the world, not because of their own differences, and that people with disabilities know what is best for themselves, and that disability is normal and something that society should take into account. When we have live captions or transcripts, we can enable someone who doesn't hear. When we provide these features in the world, we can take those differences and someone who now has those differences is no longer disabled because we've built an accessible world. And disability is the only identity that all of us are going to experience at some time in our lives. Not all of us will transition gender or transition culture, but we will all transition in and out of disabilities. That's because there's really 3 types of disability. Perhaps you've heard this from other folks, but it's a great model and it makes sense, and so I like to talk about it as well. There's situational disabilities. That is, you are in a situation where you cannot do something. We've talked about that a little bit already. We've talked about, using an elevator or curb cuts because you're pushing a stroller. We've talked about using captions because you're in a loud bar. We've talked about using automatic doors because your hands are full. Those are situations where you cannot do something that you otherwise could do. And in order to accomplish your tasks and your goals, the world needs to be designed to be accessible to you. Of course, then there's temporary disabilities. You may break your arm, you may break your leg, you may be tired or distracted. I don't think a lot of us realize just how cognitively difficult it can be to act when, something happened and you had to pull that all-nighter last night and now you've got to come into work and you've got to just make things work even though you're, on 4 hours of sleep. Or perhaps you're on some kind of medication and you need systems that work for you, even though right now you might be experiencing some temporary cognitive or physical challenges. And of course, then there's permanent disabilities. And that's what most people think about. That's the only thing that most people think about when they think about disabilities. They think about people who are blind or visually impaired. They think about people who are deaf or hard of hearing. They think about people who have cognitive challenges. But you know what else is a permanent disability? Getting older. As we get older, our hand-eye coordination isn't what it once was. Our vision isn't what it once was. Our hearing isn't what it once was. And so we are all going to experience disability at some time in our lives. And so when we think about design and we think about accessible designs aren't designs for one tiny sliver of the world and one small edge case. No, accessible designs mean designs that work for our future selves, that work for us today, and that will work for us, for you and I, going into the future. Because people with disabilities someday will be us, not just these other people. And so as we sort of talk about that, it's really important to me to change how we all think about disability and about accessibility. Because once we start thinking about it in this way, designing designs that work for our future selves, designing designs that work for everyone, creating products that work no matter what your situation is, it becomes possible to think about accessibility as an opportunity to innovate, an opportunity to build flexible experiences, an opportunity to build new ways of doing things, rather than seeing accessibility as kind of a set of checklists and some shackles that hold us all down because of some tiny minority. But unfortunately, that's all too often how we think of accessibility, and it's not helpful not only to the people with permanent disabilities who need accessibility baked into things, it's not helpful to everyone because we all need accessibility. And that said, I'd like to go over some accessibility myths that come up frequently. One that we hear all the time is that new design paradigms can't be made accessible. Every time a new design paradigm comes out, there is this kind of fear that, oh, material design, this is a new thing, skeuomorphic design. How are we going to make this accessible? What are we going to do? And we have the same problem with products. When countries began applying accessibility regulations to things, the gaming industry all said, this is absolutely impossible for us. There is no way for games to become accessible. We need to be exempted from all of these regulations because it's just not possible. Games present too much information, they move too quickly, they're too challenging, and they're too complicated. But we found out through studios that are willing to create new techniques and that are willing to innovate and that are willing to go beyond checklist thinking and think about creating great experiences for everyone, that none of those things are true. A little while ago, you may have seen a lot of press about the game The Last of Us 2 for PlayStation that is fully accessible to a vast realm of people. I myself am a computer PC gamer. I've never really been a console gamer. The PlayStation being the first console that I ever owned, largely because of this game. And I, as someone who is completely blind, was able to pick up The Last of Us 2 and play through it without any problems because it offered great audio cues, it offered customizable difficulty, it offered configurable game mechanics so that it was possible for me to have the experience that would work best. And that customizability and that innovation is really key. There's another paradigm, another new product that when it came out, people also said it would never work. People said, we are never going to be able to make touchscreen interfaces accessible. They don't provide enough feedback to be accessible. They can never be made to work for blind people. And you know, if you had asked me these questions back when I was a teenager and had my Nokia smartphone with all the buttons and sort of loved it, it was I might have said the same thing. But Apple became a leader in accessibility. The notes that I have for this talk are stored right here on my iPhone. And I'm able to read them without any difficulty. Because Apple, instead of saying, well, we can't do it, none of the existing checklists cover it, none of the existing techniques cover it, they began to innovate and they created new techniques. They created new types of gestures. They created new ways to interact, to make navigation easy and to make input easy, whether you were someone who was blind, whether you were someone who had a physical challenge, or whatever it is today, the iPhone generally works for you. And of course, that leads to the sort of overall myth that designers often feel, which is that complicated designs can't be made accessible, right? There's this desire to, I don't know, have a text-only interface, have a limited interface, have an interface that doesn't include all of the features that everyone else gets because it might be easier to make that interface accessible. And that doesn't work. Removing features to simplify designs isn't what improves accessibility. Accessible designs are flexible designs, not necessarily simple designs. So if you think about things like Microsoft Visual Studio, if you think about things like LinkedIn, Facebook, Reddit, if you think about smart home apps, all of these things are very complex. But what they are also is they are flexible and they are thoughtfully designed in order to improve accessibility for everyone. It wasn't about simplifying. It wasn't about removing features. It was about creating new experiences and thinking beyond checklists and thinking in a way that innovates. And so that said, it's all great to sort of have these grand statements, but the real question becomes, where do you start? As I've said a number of times in this talk, the first place that you start is you move beyond checklists, because accessibility checklists aren't what's going to get you to building great experiences, and they aren't what's going to help you think in an innovative way. And so, of course, the next thing is moving towards a process of inclusive and collaborative design. You've got to be thinking about how you can involve people with disabilities in your work. Because if you don't understand the needs of your users, how can you innovate, right? You're kind of stuck with these checklists because you don't understand what you're building. So you've got to work with users. You've got to involve people with disabilities in research. You've got to ensure that people are involved in every part of the product development cycle. And that's really what we help people at Fable do. And that's really what we're all about here at Fable, is making it easy and possible to work with people with disabilities so that you can start to innovate in your designs, so that you can think of the opportunity to do accessibility as something that will allow you to innovate, to create great new experiences, and to create new techniques that will work way better for everyone. And it will help you use checklists as a guide, not a set of handcuffs. And it will help you to get to a place where instead of saying it can't be done, you're saying, I don't know how to do it yet. And so that said, I know we're it's 1:40. Perfect. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. I would love to take questions if folks are interested. I was conscious of time, so I did fly through this one a little bit. And so there's a lot that I covered here. I would love to take questions on this or on anything else that is of interest.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you. Every time, or this is the second time that we're getting to host you. Every time that happens, I can see just in the chat and other places, everyone's kind of virtually nodding along, but at the same time, realizing these perspectives, which we don't often think about. So it's amazing that we have some more time for Q&A. So we have the first question by Pooja. So Pooja is asking, how can we prioritize designing for disabilities or disabled users versus your core audience, the main user group, when you are on a strict deadline? So more about negotiating, especially when you are on strict deadlines, budgets. How do you bring in the perspective to focus on accessibility?
I mean, the first and most powerful way that you could bring that perspective in is to help the project managers and the sort of senior folks in your organization learn to think about disability differently in the same way that I sort of covered in this talk, right? Because if they're saying, oh, there's not enough time, we have strict deadlines, we can't move the deadline back, we can't delay things in order to release a product that's accessible, they're thinking of accessibility as something that only 2% of people need. They're not thinking of accessibility as something that makes a product better for everyone. They're probably not thinking of it as something that like 1 in 5 people live with a disability. And they're certainly not thinking of it in terms of like how many people with just a situational or temporary disability are going to depend on those features existing in order to continue to do their job, no matter where they're in life or what they're doing or what their situation might be. And so it's about that. I mean, I know a lot of times there's this temptation to talk about accessibility as like a compliance issue. It's something that we legally have to do. And like, if that was going to drive them, they'd be doing it already, right? And so
Right.
instead, you talk about how this will make the product better for all of our users. And when you have a product that's better for all of our users, that users can depend on, that they'll be able to use no matter where they are or what they're doing, and it's easy and it's customizable, well, that builds loyalty, doesn't it? It builds recurring subscriptions. It builds recurring use. Because if you experience some temporary disability and suddenly, I don't know, the meeting tool, you broke your arm, you're going to move on. You're going to leave that tool. You're going to find something that works for you. And when your situational disability is over, are you going to go back to the tool that you had to abandon? Probably not, because that tool wasn't there for you.
So true. So true. Thank you, Pooja, for asking this question. It's definitely a question slash challenge that often you see designers trying to tackle on teams, especially when teams are like you're at a startup or an agency where someone else is paying for the project.
And that's why it's so important to me to help people change the way they think about disability.
Right. Right. So true. Are there actually to continuing on that thought, Sam? Do you are there good examples or good approaches when you are in a service relationship? So you're not the direct owner of the product or platform that you're designing, but you're designing it for the end client. How do you educate them or make them aware about this? Almost like enlightening them a little bit on the perspective.
I mean, it can depend on the client. Some clients are already aware of it and know that they need it, but they just haven't thought to ask for it, right? They haven't thought it through. As soon as you say to them, "Oh, what about accessibility?" They say, "Oh, yeah, we want that. We are just our processes aren't good enough. We forgot to put it in the requirements document or in the SOW or whatever." And they're certainly they're willing to have that conversation. Some clients, of course, especially larger organizations in government, in banking, in telecommunications, and these kinds of things, are already going to be aware of accessibility and already need it and know that they need it. The real struggle, I think, is when you get into the smaller clients, right? So like you have the pizza restaurant that's a family-owned business and has 7 employees. They are not going to be able to afford to spend too much extra money on accessibility, not because they don't want to do it, but because they're a very small business. And so the way that we have to work around that and the way that we have to think about that, if you are an agency, you've probably got design systems, you've probably got templates, you've probably got recurring components and things that you use and things that you build. If you can make those accessible by default, now you can give accessibility to all of your clients without having to do a whole bunch of custom work, right? It's something that I also talk to big platforms about a lot. And we have a lot of big platforms that work with us because if you're a small business, the agency that you use or the platform that you use to build your website, whether it's a Shopify or a Squarespace or a WordPress or whoever it may be, if they're not bringing you accessibility, they're letting you down. And so what you as an agency should be trying to do is get to a place where where your designs are accessible by default and where you can put it in your marketing literature. We make accessible products. We make accessible websites and use that to drive sales and to close deals and get to a point where it's included for everybody. And you're not saying, oh, you need accessibility? Well, we're going to have to charge you $25,000 extra for that.
Right. So true. So true. I love the idea of the kind of investing and designing them right, from the get-go, especially with your building blocks, the design systems, as you mentioned, because you're right. So much, there is a lot of focus on reusability. And so if you've got them, designed well from the start, that value kind of gets replicated everywhere. Bob had another good question. So Bob's asking, if you are a B2B enterprise, how can you gather accessibility needs of users? Example, like, do you do anonymous surveys, or are there other ways? And also, they don't always have access to people. I'm assuming Bob means access to folks with accessibility needs.
Yeah, I mean, if you're selling B2B, some businesses, if you're building internal systems, will have like ERGs, like employee kind of groups that focus on accessibility, and those employee groups are always happy to talk about accessibility because they're the people in the organization that depend on it and that need it. And so if you're working with a business that has one of those, getting in touch with them can be incredibly helpful. And I think I just lost my headset. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you well. I can hear you.
Not sure what happened there. I've just lost audio. It has been a day of technical difficulties for us all. Give me 1 second while I try and reset my system here. I don't know if I can be heard or not. There we go. We're back. Can you? Okay. Am I here?
Yes.
I apologize for that, folks. It's my turn. Yeah. But yeah. So that's one way. I mean, another way. All companies should be testing products with users with disabilities, with their customers who have disabilities. Unfortunately, not all of them do. Not all of them have thought about it. But in order to find an accessibility issue, you don't necessarily need to be a customer of that business or an expert in that field, right? What you need to be good at is using your assistive technology. And so I can, I'm not a certified public accountant, but I can very easily open an accounting software and tell you if it's going to be accessible or not. So sometimes you may just want to recruit some of your own people to work with.
Right. Very true. I think there's a kind of a follow-up question to that. And Pooja is asking, what are some of the basic tools that we can use to make sure the design is accessible enough, such as, checking color contrasts? Are there some online tools and websites? I know you had mentioned some of them last time, but if you can share them again.
Yeah, I mean, so there absolutely are. Google and Apple, if you're kind of on the iOS platform, make great automated scanners that will help scan your apps in order to find and determine accessibility issues. On the web, there are a number of great accessibility scanners. There's Axe, there's Google Lighthouse, there's things like that. But what those focus on doing is, checking the accessibility of already built things.
Hmm.
But most design systems, if you look around, will probably have an accessibility plugin. I
Hmm.
know Adobe's does. I know
Hmm.
Figma does.
Hmm.
And so what those plugins will do is you can install them, and they will help you by adding those warnings to see if your color contrast is good enough or not,
Hmm.
to make sure that your spacing is okay. But
Hmm.
another thing that they can do is they can help you provide to developers accessibility information that is needed that might be otherwise awkward to provide in your design system, right? Like alt text,
Hmm.
or like focus, or like labels of buttons for screen readers, or things like that. Because there's a lot of accessibility information that wireframing systems don't by default always support. And so, I mean, I can't give like exact answers because I don't know what software you're using, but look at the design software you're using and look for accessibility plugins that integrate directly with that software and can then not only tell you about the errors, but help you provide kind of more accessibility information as you're doing your designs.
That's amazing. Yeah, you're right on point. I think Sketch and Figma. I've used some color contrast ones in the past. Brian is sharing that there is a Chrome Wave plugin is pretty great. Also, I think the phrase he used, accessibility scanners, maybe that could be something folks can also try searching around.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely. But again, a lot of those scanners are going to be for HTML files and websites that
right,
already exist.
right,
But if you can get those plugins in your Figma, in your other systems,
right,
then they can tell you if you're making a mistake before anything even gets built, which is
right.
better for you, saves you redoing
Yeah,
things, saves the company money, helps you hit those deadlines, right?
yeah. So true, so true. Um, Andrew is trying to kick off a leaderboard, I think. So Andrew's asking if you had a scoreboard for companies that live and breathe accessibility, which ones would you place at the top? So I know you mentioned Apple.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing about Apple is that they had these touchscreen iPhones. The
Mm,
very first model of iPhone didn't have a screen reader, but
mm,
every single model after that did. And so just the innovation that went into
mm,
like we are going to make a touchscreen device fully accessible even if you can't see the screen
mm,
is incredible, right? The work and the thought that they had to do to go into that. And then, there's another part of that is that Apple showed up to the community. I
mm,
mean, I know it showed up to lots of disability. I can speak to my experience in the blindness community. It went to our conferences and to our conventions and to our meetings, and it showed up to convince us that,
mm.
hey, a touchscreen device can be accessible. You know?
Right.
And that's part that's too often missed kind of in the accessibility field. Is like someone will create something that's accessible
Mm.
and then never tell anyone. Right? Like come on, if you've done good innovative work,
Right.
go and show people and they will embrace that. And love to be targeted, in these kinds of marketing and announcements and things.
Mm,
So Apple's definitely one of them. Microsoft in the last little while has made great, incredible strides in
mhm.
building accessibility into their processes to make sure that all the things they do, because if you're Microsoft, right, you've got Office, you've got Windows, you've got Dynamics, you've got
Mm,
365, you've got Mail, you've got all these different products,
right.
and they have been really working on making sure that accessibility is in company processes so that it's not just, oh, this Microsoft product is accessible but this other one over here isn't.
Right.
If you're a big company, that can be another thing.
Mm,
There's so many great companies. I mean, Amazon. The joke I sort of used to tell is, hey, if I can't get it at Amazon, it's not in my house. Just because I don't like in-person shopping. But Amazon was a very accessible way to do it. And so there are a lot of companies that are doing really great jobs. I've mentioned sort of the market leaders that everyone's
mm,
heard of because they're the ones everyone's heard of.
right.
But there are smaller companies that are doing great accessibility work. You don't have to be, a multi-billion-dollar company
Right.
to do great accessibility work. I mean, The Last of Us 2, the gaming studio that created that,
Yeah.
they're a pretty big company, but they're not like a Fortune 500.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't have to be a mega corporation to do accessibility. You can do
Right.
it yourself, and you can be one of those great companies in your industry that is an accessibility leader. Because that's another thing, if you're trying to talk about why is it important that we can do accessibility, if you're the one doing best at it in your industry, that's a huge marketing point. Look, for example, at the Zoom meeting software, right? That we use for just about everything, because
Right.
we know we can depend on it to be accessible, and so
Mm.
they've really been able to sort of take advantage of that industry leader in accessibility position in our particular industry.
Mm.
So whatever your industry is, focus on being the most accessible knitting website or frozen food website or sales customer relations management software or whatever you do. Figure out what your industry is and take the lead there. Anyway, wow, that was a digression. I apologize.
No, no, that was amazing, and I think it was really helpful to hear of categories examples which are not just the market leader. So thank you so much for sharing that too. Um, we have one more question from Tiffany. So I think the first part of Tiffany's question we did cover earlier, which was around how do you make the financial case to get leadership buy-in for resources, meaning dedicated team members and tools. But Tiffany also has a really interesting second part to the question, which is there like external data, like government data, that can be used to support the case? So I'm assuming around, like the how many in your target audience would have accessibility needs? Uh,
There is some here in Canada. StatsCan
mm,
has recently sort of been doing a lot of studies into the power, the number of folks with accessibility needs. The UK government has also done similar studies.
mm,
The United States government, from what I found, hasn't quite got there, but there are a lot of industry leaders in the States who take on that kind of thing.
mm,
Like Nielsen, for example, did a really interesting study recently on the loyalty and buying power of people with disabilities.
mm.
So there's this. The data is available. You just have to sort of look for it in PDFs and in studies and in kind of the government websites. It's not quite as upfront as we wish it could be, but it is absolutely there. I know on the Fable website we also sort of cite some of these studies and list some of this data. So it's there. Another kind of way to look at it is to look at websites like the WebAIM. They release a screen reader study every year that kind of they also release the top million study that you may have heard of that looks at how accessible the top 1 million kind of websites are. And they will also have a lot of this data about like who is using what, especially kind of in the screen reader community.
That's amazing. Thank you, Samuel. Tiffany, I hope that was helpful. We're almost 1 minute away. If anyone has any other questions, few folks have been sharing some more kind of tools and resources. So Dora shared the Stark plugin, which I think quite a few other folks also mentioned. I've also used it in the past, and I think they have a Figma as well as Sketch plugin and XD plugin. So Stark is pretty good.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
they're a big name in the space. Absolutely.
yeah, and Color Oracle for color blindness simulation, and then Contrast seems to be another tool for color contrast. So those are some more tools. Um,
Absolutely. I know it's coming up on 2. So it's
yes.
it's been great to talk to everyone this time. I know that was a super fast, information dense presentation. If you're processing what you've heard and you say, "Oh, geez, I wish I would ask this," absolutely feel free to get a hold of me. I'm always happy to answer questions when I can.
Thank you, Sam. And I've shared Samuel's email, Samuel at makeitfable.com down here. Yeah, one of Samuel's team members also told me that you do live and breathe Outlook, Microsoft Outlook, because
Yes,
it's
that's where I live.
yeah.
Everything, if it's in my inbox or my calendar,
Yeah.
it happens. If it doesn't get into Outlook, maybe.
Really, really appreciate it. And once again, there are more resources, more articles and case studies on makeitfable.com. And rest, do join us in the Slack community at Designing Start community. We will be hosting Samuel once again at Remote Design Week, our conference next month, October 18 to 22. And until then, let's keep the conversations going in the topic accessibility channel. And if there are specific questions, you can email Samuel directly, and I'm happy to do that on your behalf too. Really appreciate, Samuel, you making the time and joining us, and also being patient with some of those tech glitches early on.
Hey, well, they happen to both of us, so
Yes.
it happens to us all, no matter what. That said, I look forward to next month and the conference.
Thank you so much.
Talk soon.
Bye.